Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I am Jennifer Oraquad, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Now, according to a report by Fortune Business Insights, the global human resources technology market is projected to grow by $11.6 billion, that's billion with a B, over the next 17 years. The digital disruption brought in by COVID, likely to continue, has forced HR teams to become more adaptive to the needs of the workforce and more agile in meeting those needs through technology. Now, if that information has sent you into a panic because maybe you haven't kept up to date with the rapidly changing world of HR tech, panic no more, because my guest today has got you covered. Stacey Harris is Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. She's frequently included in Human Resource Executive and the HR Technology Conference's Top 100 HR Tech Influencers list, and she sits on the International Human Resource Information Management Board of Directors. This summer, she published her first book, Introduction to HR Technologies: Understand How to Use Technology to Improve Performance and Processes. And I am so excited to have you with me on the show to talk about why technology really matters. Hi, Stacey. Welcome to Project HR.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be talking about this topic. It's such an important one, as you noted, and thank you for having me on to speak to your audience.
Of course. Now, Stacey, our first episode of this podcast, which is almost 2 years ago now, centered on technology, highlighting people analytics. And back then, there was a lot of discussion of techno fear within HR. Have the events of the last 18 months gotten us past that fear and perhaps changed the conversation around the topic of HR technology?
I think fear is such an interesting way to comment on technology, and I think there's two places where fear comes from. I think there's fear of not understanding how to use the technology and how to leverage it, and I think there's fear of not understanding how the technology itself will be used from a data and decision making perspective. And I think we're starting to get to the point where people get the value proposition of HR technology. That's been decided. Everyone knows they have to leverage it. They know they have to know how to use it. I think we're over that piece. I don't think we're over the piece, which is how is the data, how is the technology going to be used to make decisions? That's the piece I think that we're still struggling with a bit.
For sure. Now, I'm seeing your book popping up on all sorts of lists as an essential reading for HR professionals. Why did you write this book, and why did you write it now?
I will say, I've been writing the book for probably 5 years, 2 years with the publisher Kogan. I was really excited when they came to me and asked me to do this book because I had been doing research in the HR technology space for over 10 years, started out as a practitioner, but when I started doing research, it really focused on what HR practitioners were doing to get the best outcomes. And ultimately, that ended up into a conversation oftentimes about processes, practices, and technology. And so 2 years ago, I started realizing that I oftentimes was doing a lot more education and helping people understand how they fit their technology into their broader strategy. And many times people just didn't understand all the pieces and parts before they could even start to think about the strategy. And so the book really came out of the desire to provide a holistic view of the HR technology market in a very practical way that someone from an HR generalist to a student exiting college to the head of a company who really needs to understand the value of that technology could pick up and sort of understand at any level. And so that's really where it came out of.
And I love the idea that this was brewing in your mind for years and years and years before it came to fruition. As you were writing, who did you see as the book's audience?
Well, I think probably the person I saw most as the audience was myself. I started, like I said, I came out of being a practitioner. I was in the learning and organizational development roles and change management and HR support roles for many, many years, large retail organizations and big financial organizations. And I started my research career at Burson Associates. Many people might know that name and the work that they had done early on. And I came into the work not knowing a lot about the technology. I knew the processes and I understood the value of the technology, but I didn't know who the vendors were and why this company named PeopleSoft was so important in the market at that point in time. That was 2007, right? And I didn't understand the history of the difference between a mainframe and a true SaaS environment was just
Hmm.
starting to come out. And I was afraid to ask questions, right? I felt like I should know it all. I was coming
Hmm.
from the market. I was supposed to be an expert in it. I was standing in front of people presenting on it. Um, and so really the audience was me. I was like, I needed something to help me. This is for anybody who's like me, who really needs to have that basic understanding of where everything came from.
Well, and I appreciate the conversational quality of your writing. So the reassuring way the material is presented, the way it's laid out, it's free from jargon. It's not your typical tech book, and that's not easy to accomplish when you're dealing with a subject this dense. So how did you choose this approach? Was it a conscious decision, or is it just how you communicate?
I think probably it is very much a part of who I am. If you've read anything, I do a lot of research papers and a lot of writing
Hmm.
in the last 10 years, and I really do start from the starting point of the practitioner. So I try and think as much as possible about what did I need to understand and how do I need to sort of break it down. I also have a learning background, so I probably approach it a little bit like an instructional designer, if anybody knows that process. So I think about, how do you have to define everything, and what are the tools people need? So what's the objective you're trying to get out of them reading this piece? So I think both those things probably helped. But probably the biggest thing that helped when I was writing this is my editors at Kogan, who were amazing, by the way. Anne Marie was probably one of the most helpful. I had sort of put together a whole bunch of information, and I felt like it was a bit overwhelming. There was a lot of pieces and parts everywhere in the
Hmm.
research and in the book that I was writing. And she said, why don't you talk about it in stages of how you sort of understood your own sort of journey through technology? And I think that helped a lot as well, figuring out that I first had to question what was the technology. Then I had to question why was it valuable. Then I had to question what would it do for my future. And that's a lot of how I built the book.
So in reading the book, what one thing do you hope readers will walk away with an understanding of?
Boy, that's a good question. And I get asked that often, and I think there's probably two things that I can't sort of like kind of like picking your two favorite
Sure.
children, right?
Right. Sure.
There's not a good answer there, but I do think that the two things I really hope everyone sort of takes away from the book when they read it is one, that no matter their role in HR, they need to understand how technology works and how the data inside that technology is going to impact the and HR processes and the HR outcomes that are going on in their organization. The second thing, which I think to me is really important, is that we really need to understand as HR professionals, as HR technologists, as executives and leaders in our own organizations that HR technology has some of the biggest impact on people's lives
Hmm.
on an everyday level. The paycheck that they get, the place where they get their benefits information, the fact that if they're in the middle of a hurricane and they need to have access to information about their insurance providers, right?
Hmm.
There's just so many places where our HR technology has to create an environment that human beings need to access quickly and need to create a sort of a usable and friendly environment. I think we often forget that. And in HR, we oftentimes think about it as a technology that the business needs to gather data. We forget how important it is on the human side of this front. And so for me, that's the second thing that really I hope everyone takes away from it is how important the work they're doing and the HR technology that they're providing to the market is to the end user and the employee in their everyday life.
I love that. I love that perspective of the daily impact that you're having on your employees as opposed to the data that we're gathering or how we're going to implement that data. Fascinating. All right, Stacey, I have to take a sponsorship break right now, but when we return, I want to dig into all the ways your book can catch us up on the world of HR tech. We'll be back in a moment. Well, hold on. This isn't quite a sponsorship break. I've actually got a really exciting announcement instead. To celebrate the end of our second year of weekly Project HR episodes, we are doing another big book giveaway. If you remember, last year we gave away a book from every author who appeared on Project HR in 2020. Now we're doing the same for 2021. Just by helping us spread the word about Project HR and all the great things we talk about over here, you could win a copy of every book featured on the podcast this year. That's well over a dozen titles from the best of HR, including Jennifer Moss's Burnout Epidemic, Perry Tim's second edition of Transformational HR, Dr. Scott Beeson's Whole Person Workplace, and so many more. To get all the details, head over to projectionsinc.com/podcast. I'm back now with Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner of Sapient Insights Group, and author of Introduction to HR Technologies. Understand how to use technology to improve performance and processes. So, Stacey, right out of the gate, your book does a great job of giving us a comprehensive view of where we've been as an industry regarding technology. Why was this look back important?
Well, the look back, I think, is probably one of the most important parts of the book. There's a lot of books that have written about the future of work and where the market is
Hmm.
heading, and how exciting emerging technology is. But for me, I've been inside of a lot of these organizations, both as a consultant and as a practitioner, and now as a researcher. And I get millions of comments every day on our research platform about the fact that organizations are still dealing with technology that they've had in place for 10 to 15 years. And for anybody who's coming into an organization who doesn't understand their current HR technology environment, they can be very, overwhelming to understand that
Hmm.
there's technology there that, has been in place for a long time. And there's not a lot of information in the market about what that technology should be able to do, can do, how it works. And so for me, that was a big part of the book, was letting people know that, you're not going to walk into, the most forward thinking, HR technology environment in most organizations. You're going to be walking into a mixed environment of new technologies, old technologies, and understanding that makes it a lot easier to be able to work in it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And part of the challenge of any book that focuses on technology in any industry is the fact that you're dealing with a field that changes quickly. So quickly, in fact, that even defining, what we include under the umbrella term technology can radically change from one year to the next. So right now in 2021, what does the term HR technology include?
That's a great question. And I will say that in the 2 years that I was writing it, I went back and forth between, like, should this product be in here? Should not be in here, right? This is a challenge, I think, always for technology type books. And, I talked to the publisher about the fact that we'll probably need a new update every 2 years on this book.
Hmm.
But today, I think currently HR technology really encompasses anything that is utilized inside of an organization to either provide information to or gather data from an employee in some fashion, and then ultimately to help organizations make workforce based decisions. Now, the thing that's changing the market around this is that generally used to be a lot of more what we'd consider back office technologies. Your HRMS, your payroll
Hmm.
platform, even your LMS generally were tools that had a lot of administrative support and a little bit of front end to allow the end user to access information. We're also now starting to see tools like Microsoft Office Teams and Viva, right, becoming a big tool set in um, the the area that organizations are looking at as far as gathering data on their employee work environments and productivity. And so that is now becoming part of the HR technology conversation. And so these kind of changes are happening, as you said, very rapidly.
Hmm.
And we are seeing a lot of technology that traditionally was considered part of either operations or other areas of the business now fall into the purview of HR.
Well, and on that note, your book does a great job of tying technology to specific aspects of HR work. So, recruitment, performance management, learning and development. Why is it important for us to make those direct connections?
Yeah, that there's a lot of, I think, challenges in the difference between sort of how organizations look at processes and functions and functionality in HR technology, and how they think about it as what we call an ecosystem or an environment. We have for a very long time been very siloed in how we think about HR technology. So the recruiting department has its software, and the
Hmm.
learning department has its software, and the HR department that is at the generalist level has their HRMS. But the three things didn't always talk to very well together or have really great integrations. And the professionals who worked in those functions didn't realize the impact they might be having on the data that was going downstream or upstream in their little environment that they were working in. And I think today what we're seeing, and the reason I really wanted to tie it to the processes, is that people really needed to understand that, yes, you might have a functional role inside the organization, but when you touch technology, you're touching everyone and everyone else's data. And so you really have to understand how these things are connected. So it is understanding how the processes work together as well as the data.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the activities in the book. One of the reviews of Introduction to HR Technologies describes it as the kind of book you keep on your desk with pages folded, binding cracked, coffee stains on the cover, well worn from thumbing through it again and again. And I love that image because this book really is so actionable, with those hands on activities sections after each chapter. Can you talk a little bit about those activities and what they are?
Yeah. So when I first started writing the book, I ended each chapter and I thought, well, the trainer or educator in me was like, well, how do you retain this information? It's just a
Mm.
lot, right? Every chapter had definitions. It had why is it important to me? What is the goal and outcome you're trying to achieve with this technology? I thought, well, the one way that I always learn is I go and talk to people, to me, and I go get information that makes it more practical. And so I started to think about the fact that at the end of every chapter, I wanted to put in place a series of exercises that would give anyone who, again, might have been like me as a practitioner inside the organization, an excuse And it really is just that, an excuse to go talk to other people in their organization. I can't tell you how many times I would want to understand a piece of technology and I didn't know who to talk to or didn't know how to start the
Mm.
conversation. Well, it's really great to say, well, I've been reading this book and they're telling me I need to understand all of the technology in my organization that's being used for recruiting. Can you tell me what that is? And maybe I can start to sort of document it. It gives a good, I think, opportunity for professionals who are trying to develop their own skills to be able to sort of leverage this as a reason to start the conversation.
I like that. And I noticed that each chapter also includes a why you need to care section. And just just as a little too much sharing, but I have a tiny chair on my desk. And so in that chair sits the person who's my audience in everything that I do. And so I picture that person sitting there saying, so what? And so I love the why you need to care section. Why is our collective buy-in so critical when it comes to HR tech?
The why you need to care, I think, and this was particularly because oftentimes the audience who I was speaking to was not someone who came from the HR technology space or who was doing an administrative role inside the technology, but someone maybe who came through learning or came through recruiting or came through another process area, or as I said, was an executive in the company. I felt that the why you needed to care was important so that organizations could or so that the breeders could understand that this has an impact on other things that they're trying to accomplish in the
Mhm.
organization.
That makes sense. All right, Stacey, I'm going to take some time out for a little station identification. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner of Sapient Insights Group, and author of the new book, Introduction to HR Technologies. Understand how to use technology to improve performance and processes. All right, we're back now. And Stacey, I want to talk a little bit about how HR technology has always been sold to us on the practitioner side as something that's going to make our lives easier. This is going to make your job easier. But now it's about more than that. And it's not necessarily simplifying things.
Yes, that is so correct, Jennifer. I mean, we're definitely seeing, if you'll read my book, I do not talk about how this is going to make your life easier. I do not talk about how it's going to make processes faster. That was definitely a conversation we had in the early days of technology, the automation of it. And automation always does help improve in some areas, such as data integrity and security issues, those type of things. But we're seeing so much technology now added to the market that the complexity is really adding a challenge for organizations. But here's the real important thing, I think, for HR professionals. What you should be looking from your HR technology for is not to make your lives easier, but to figure out the value it can add to the business and add to the end user's perspective and their lives, right? So it is really all about value add, not about simplifying your workload.
So in the book, we also talk about tech that might not be involved in the day-to-day work of HR today, but certainly impacts the world around it. I'm talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things. Why do HR practitioners need to understand these technologies?
I think that we use the term artificial intelligence as this sort of scary,
Mhm.
Terminator,
Mhm.
language. I think we all see visions of the movie theaters, back when we were kids in the 80s, right?
Right.
And what really artificial intelligence is today is very much like an infant that's on auto replay, right? It's a tool that can generally kind of figure out how to improve a process that it's doing on a regular basis. There's very few places where real artificial intelligence is being used in HR technology. It's mostly process automation. But where I think the world is heading is that organizations have to understand not just what artificial intelligence could possibly do in the future, but more importantly, we need to train our people who are viewing the data and are accessing the data that's coming back from any kind of automated algorithms or artificial intelligence or predictive analytics through a different lens than what we have previously viewed data coming out of technology before. So before we used to have rules and environments where an employee or a person would put in the data and the data coming back was sort of judged by a human, right or wrong, yes or no, up or
Mhm.
down. When
Mhm.
it's being judged by an algorithm that has been designed by historical perspectives and end users, employees, and HR professionals who are looking at the data have to understand that it's given to them not as a yes or a no, but as a probabilities. And so when you're seeing 80% of employees who have this challenge might leave the organization, well, there's 20% who won't. And what you really have to understand is if I'm making a decision about how I'm going to address someone who might have a risk of flight in the organization, do I want to base my discussion on the 20% or on the 80%? And that's a really hard conversation because it's, again, not a yes or no answer. And so that, I think, is the most important thing that we have to learn about those type of technologies, is that we have to rewire our brain to think in terms of probabilities, and how we change the conversation to be much more about, this is a possibility, or this is an opportunity, or this is a thing we have to think about, but it's not a yes or no, it's going to happen.
So, and I mentioned your role at Sapient Insights Group, of course, which lines up nicely with your book for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about Sapient?
Yeah, Sapient is a research and advisory firm. We recently just spun off, so we're just a year old, but the organization really is made up of two entities that I've been doing the research under the annual HR Systems Survey brand for the last 17 years, and the research itself has been done for the last 24 years. And so that research was spun off from another organization and a advisory and consulting firm that was known as Steelbridge for 13 years. It was run by Susan Richards, came together, and the two entities created Sapient Insights Group. And what we really wanted to be able to do was take this long-standing research that I had the honor of being sort of overseer of for the last several years, and the advisory services that I'd seen Susan doing with her organization around change management and helping organizations leverage data, and put that together so that organizations could really think differently about how they were using not just technology, but the processes and practices around it. And so our organization is really all about getting the data people need to make better decisions for their businesses. That's what it is. And I run, as the chief research officer, the research side of the house. And then we have another group of very amazing professionals who are running advisory services, helping organizations figure out how to leverage the data.
And of course, you're also vice chair for the International Human Resource Information Management Board of Directors. And IRIM is an amazing resource for our listeners. Tell me a little bit about that group and your work there.
Yeah, IRIM is a phenomenal organization. They really started out in 1980s. They were an association that was brought together at the ground level from professionals who had all kind of got together and said, "Hey, there's this HR technology world that we're all now sort of being thrown into, because there was no formal training, no formal certifications, no process for learning the tools." And they got together and started to help each other, and that's a lot of what IRIM is. The association is a membership model. There's a lot of education. They've now created a certification that allows those professionals who want to be certified in the skill sets that they have built around HR technology. That certification is a great way to sort of show that you've been able to put that into practice. And then there is a lot of networking and connections, which I think is really the three important things that we're seeing in the market right now for anybody in this industry is, who do you know, and what is your network? What is the knowledge and skills you're bringing to an environment, and how capable are you of continuing to grow your own skill set? And I think anybody who can do those three things can really bring value to any organization.
And Stacey, you also have your own brand new podcast, and we love to flip the script and have hosts on as guests. So tell me a little bit about your podcast, Spilling the Tea on HR Tech.
Yeah, this is an exciting new opportunity that I've just recently stepped into. I had run or co-hosted a podcast for about 5 years before this on sort of HR technology news. And when we started the new organization, my partners and I really wanted to sort of broaden the concept of what we could do with HR technology and the HR practices conversation. And so we decided to create more of an HR podcast platform called HR Huddle. I think you can find it on Apple Podcast, Player FM, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, I believe, is all the different places that it is now loaded. And we just launched our very first podcast last week, so it's very early days. As anybody who knows who runs podcasts, it takes a little while to sort of get all the different pieces and parts together. But it is really a compendium of 3 different podcasts that we do on a regular basis through the Sapient Insights organization. My personal one that I do is called Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, and it is focused on helping organizations understand the big news that is happening every week in the HR tech space. So if you want to know about who's merging with who from a big vendor perspective, what big launches are happening, what big conferences are happening, or maybe what kind of investments organizations are making in the HR technology space, you'll get that news every week from that podcast.
All right. Finally, where can we go to learn more about you, your book, your podcast, and your work with Sapient?
Well, probably the easiest place to find out more information about me is on LinkedIn. You can just look up Stacey Harris. Sometimes you might put Stacey Harris HR because there's a lot of Harrises out there.
Hmm.
But you will be able to find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter at Stacey Harris HR. Stacey with an EY, so that might help a little bit too. And then if you really are wanted to understand a little bit more about my book or understand a little bit more about the work that I do on an everyday basis, you can go to sapientinsights.com. That is our website, and there's a lot of information there as well.
All right. Links to Sapient Insights and IREM, as well as a link to Stacey's book, Introduction to HR Technologies, will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Stacey, it is time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I will do my best, yes.
All right. Our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about HR technologies. In your professional opinion, Stacey, which of these fictional franchises best predicted future technologies? Back to the Future or Star Trek?
Oh, Star Trek by far.
Yeah, I would agree. 100%. All right. What's the best book you've read recently?
Oh, the best book I've read recently. That's a trick question. Well, it's going to be a little bit of a different one. It's Okay to Not Be Okay is a book that I recently read. It's about grief. I've had a lot of loss in my life. I lost my husband about 5 years ago. I lost a dear friend a year ago. And I think in this time and age, everyone should be sort of looking for ways to sort of think about the loss we've all had of our own worlds. So it's a great book on that front.
What's your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I love sharing with people. I'm a bit of an introvert. People are oftentimes very surprised when I tell them that. I don't do small talk very easily. I get into big events, and I feel like I'd rather sort of be stuck in a corner reading a book and be happy with that. So for me, this work that I do, both the research, the writing of the book, and the advisory services that I offer to the market, it allows me an opportunity to have conversations at a really deep level, oftentimes on topics that I enjoy speaking about. And so for me, it's all about sharing and conversations and keeping the discussions going so we can help the market grow, because I think there's so much that we can do that is good in this market, and we impact so many people in the work that we do every day.
I love that. All right. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice that I've ever been given. That's a tough one. I will have to say that the best piece of advice that I have ever been given is a dear friend of mine who I'd known from childhood. Was when we were first trying to figure out sort of where we were going to be going in our future, I had a situation where I had been turned down for the college that I wanted to go to, and I was in tears and very upset about the fact that I was not going to be able to be the world famous journalist that I thought I was going to be in the world. And I could remember her sort of looking at me and she was saying, you have so many things you want to do. Really, all you have to do is figure out where you take your first step from. And I thought, and that has stuck with me for as long as I can remember, that, sometimes instead of always thinking about where we're going to end up and the fact that maybe the journey isn't what we want it to be, it's just the first step that's the most important.
I like that. All right. Last question. Who or what inspires you?
I am inspired by the practitioners, by the HR professionals in the market. I know that sounds maybe a little bit kitschy, but I have amazing people in my life who have done amazing things for me as coaches and mentors, and I think all of them have been inspiring in their own way. But I know that there are people who get up every day and do the hard work that we need to do to make sure people get their paychecks, to make sure that someone has their health insurance, to make sure that people are taken care of during big, storms and fires and all the things that are going on in the world. And to me, that's the HR professionals who get up and do their job every day. And so for me, that kind of sort of uncommon heroism that we often don't talk about is important. And so I am inspired every day with the people that I work with and the people that I am hopefully helping the work that I do.
Yeah, I don't think that's kitschy at all. I'm inspired by the folks who listen to this podcast every day, the people who are in the trenches and doing the work. Stacey, thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
And thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Really looking forward to it. And please, if the audience has any questions, let me know.
All right, will do. Thanks to our listeners. Once again, this is your reminder to grab the companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. And as I mentioned, we're always looking for great guests. If you know someone who you would love for us to interview here on Project HR, email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And of course, make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR. Subscribe to the podcast on our website, and of course, share Project HR with your network. And if you're finding value in our weekly content, give us a handful of stars wherever you get your podcasts. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.